All right, welcome everyone. Today we're diving deep into a really important analysis from a recent RBI bulletin. It's all about one of India's most critical sectors. We're talking steel and how a huge wave of cheap imports is basically putting our own domestic industry under siege. Let's get into it.
So let's jump right in. We've got a real puzzle on our hands, a central paradox that we're going to try and solve today. Think about it. On one hand, India's booming, right? We're building roads, bridges, entire cities. Our demand for steel is just going through the roof. But then, on the other hand, our very own steel producers are the ones who are struggling. How does that even make sense? That's the big mystery we're here to unravel.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the paradox itself. Then, we'll look at the tools the economists use to investigate. After that, we'll follow the data, see what it tells us, understand the real impact, and finally, I'll wrap it all up with some key exam takeaways for you.
All right, first up, India's steel paradox. Let's treat this like a crime scene, okay? We've got this soaring demand for steel, but at the same time, our own production is hitting a wall. So what is going on here?
So let's look at the demand side first. India's appetite for steel right now is just incredible. We're talking about a huge 11.5% year-on-year growth in consumption. That's massive. This is what's fueling our growth, right? All those big infrastructure and construction projects. So the demand is definitely there. But, and this is a big but, that's only half the story.
And here's where we find our first big clue. While our steel consumption is flying high at 11.5%, our own domestic production has slowed down, way down to just 6.8%. You see that? This gap right here, this is the core of the problem. It's this massive space between what India needs and what our own producers are actually making.
So if we're not making enough, where's all that extra steel coming from? Well, the prime suspect is something called steel dumping. Now, for anyone studying for exams, this is a term you absolutely have to know. Basically, it's when other countries have way too much steel, so they dump it in markets like ours at super low prices. We're talking prices that are often even lower than their own cost of production. And what that does is it completely undercuts our local producers.
Okay, so we've got our suspect, dumping. Now let's look at the forensics. How exactly do economists figure this stuff out? It's time to open up their toolkit and see the methods they used in this study.
First tool up is the Unit Value Index, or UVI for short. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Just think of it as the average price tag for imported steel. So if the UVI drops, it's a clear signal that cheaper steel is flooding into the country. For the economists, this is a huge red flag for price pressure from imports.
Okay, now for the big guns, the Structural Vector Autoregression, or SVAR model. Yeah, I know, the name is a mouthful, but don't worry about it. The easiest way to think of it is like an economic MRI. It lets economists see how a single event, let's say a sudden drop in import prices, sends shockwaves through the whole economy. It shows them exactly how that one thing affects everything else, like our domestic production and consumption, over the next few months.
And the last tool in the kit is something called price elasticity of imports. This is super important. It's just a number, but it tells us something critical. Exactly how much do we buy when the price changes? If this number is high, it means we're really sensitive to prices. So even a tiny drop in the global price of steel could cause a gigantic flood of imports into India.
All right, we've got the tools. Now it's time to follow the data trail. Let's look at the hard evidence the economist actually found.
In this chart right here, it just lays it all out visually. You can clearly see that gap between consumption and production we were talking about, and you can see it's getting wider. This is that vacuum in the market. And you know what rushes in to fill a vacuum? Cheap imports.
And boy, did they fill it quickly. Just look at this number. In 2023-24, steel imports shot up by 22%. That's not a small increase. That's a massive surge. It's like the floodgates just opened up, all thanks to those softer international prices. So the next question is, where is all this cheap steel actually coming from? So let's take a look at the breakdown. The biggest chunk is coming from South Korea, that's about 14.6%. Then you've got China with almost 10%. After that, it's the USA, Japan, and the UK. So yeah, these are the main countries involved here. Now, for all of you preparing for exams, I know trying to memorize a list of countries can be a pain. So here's a little trick, a mononymic that's actually related to the topic. Just remember this phrase: some cheap units jeopardize us. See? That gives you South Korea, China, USA, Japan, and the UK. Pretty handy for revision, right?
Okay, let's recap our case. We have our suspect, dumping. We have the motive, cheap prices, and we've seen the evidence. So now it's time for the verdict. Let's connect all the dots and see what the real damage is.
So, remember that fancy SVAR model we talked about? Well, this breaks down what it found into a simple chain reaction. Here's how it plays out. Step 1. The price of imported steel, the UVI, drops. Step 2. Almost immediately, the amount of steel we import surges. Now, what's interesting is that overall consumption goes up, but there's a delay, about 5 to 7 months. But here's the knockout punch. Our own domestic production takes a major hit, and it starts to fall about 8 to 10 months down the line.
And if you needed any more proof, here it is in black and white. This is the final number. The economists calculated that the price elasticity for steel imports is somewhere between -0.73 and -1.01. Let me translate that for you. It means for every single 1% drop in the price of imported steel, the amount we import jumps by anywhere from 0.73% to just over 1%. This, right here, is the smoking gun. It's concrete proof that our import levels are incredibly sensitive to those global price cuts.
All right, let's pull all of this together. Think of this next part as your case file for revision. We're going to go over all the key takeaways you'll need for your exams.
First things first, let's lock in the core problem. The big issue is that gap. Consumption is growing at 11.5%, but our own production is lagging at 6.8%. Make sure you know the definition of steel dumping, inside and out. And don't forget the direct consequence of all this. For the first time in 4 years, our domestic steel industry's capacity utilization actually dropped below 80%. That's a direct hit.
Next up, the methodology, the tools they used. Remember the Unit Value Index, or UVI? That was the price tracker. The SWAR model, that's what confirmed the chain reaction. Lower prices lead to more imports, which hurts our production. And finally, panel data regression. That's the statistical method they use to analyze data from a bunch of countries over time to come up with that final, solid elasticity number.
Okay, let's talk numbers. These are the data points you have to have at your fingertips. First, the top 5 importers. Just remember our mnemonic for that. Second, that huge 22% surge in import volume in 2023-24. And third, the final verdict, the price elasticity between -0.73 to -1.01. That's the hard data that proves the case. And finally, what's the bottom line? The conclusion is really straightforward. Lower import prices directly harm our domestic production. So what's the solution? Well, the paper doesn't call for just blocking all imports. Instead, it suggests a balanced approach. That means some smart policy support from the government, but also a real push for our own industry to step up its game through more innovation and better cost efficiency.
And all of this really leaves us with a huge critical question that isn't just about steel. As India goes full steam ahead with Make in India, trying to become a manufacturing giant, we face this massive dilemma. How do you balance the need for cheap raw materials, which everybody needs to grow, with the absolute necessity of protecting our own key industries? It's a tough balancing act, a real tightrope walk, and figuring that out is probably one of the biggest challenges on our journey to becoming a fully developed economy.